Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Austin Cavelli is a board-certified, nationally accredited physician's assistant, focused on using the carnivore diet to help people reduce inflammation, get lean, and improve their health. She has treated thousands of patients with acute and chronic inflammatory diseases, including various autoimmune conditions. She takes an approach of food quality and bio-individuality to help her patients. Born and raised in Syracuse, New York, Austin earned her bachelor's degree in psychobiology from Binghamton University. While studying, she was elected into several honor societies, including Sigma Alpha Lambda, the National Honor and Merit Scholar Society, and the National Society for Leadership and Success. In 2014, Austin graduated from Weill Cornell Graduate School of Medical Sciences with a physician's assistant certificate, as well as a master's degree in physician assistant studies. You can check out her website at qualitycarnivore.com and on social media at qualitycarnivore. Austin Cavelli, what an honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on here and speak with you today.
It's just such an honor to host you, primarily not just because we get to talk about meat and the carnivore diet, which I love, but we get to talk to somebody who has a dream of starting a grass-fed steakhouse and barbecue pit. That's amazing.
Yes, they don't exist. And I am obviously, as my name alludes to, I'm very interested in quality. I think it's very important when it comes to food, getting away from processed food, of course, but then even taking it a step further and really focusing on grass-fed and finished. And trust me, I lived in Manhattan for 10 years, and there is not a grass-fed, grass-finished steakhouse that exists. Argentinian steakhouses are probably the closest that you can come to it, but a fully grass-fed, grass-finished steakhouse or barbecue joint, I've tried them all.
Well, that's awesome. I think I'm taking the same approach that our mutual friend, Scott Mislinski, who hosts the Carnivore Cast, the approach that he took on his podcast was basically using it to leverage an invite to your barbecue pit house and steakhouse. So I'm kind of doing the same, hoping that one day you'll return the favor and give me an invite to go eat some amazing high quality meat.
Absolutely. You most definitely will be invited.
That's awesome. You do a lot of really interesting work. I really am a huge fan of your blog, and you put out a blog post that I would really, really like to talk about. It was all about intermittent fasting and not just the pros. I think we talk so much about the pros of intermittent fasting. We're certainly huge fans of intermittent fasting, but also talking about the cons. And I really want to deep dive into that with you. I think it's such an interesting topic. Before we do, though, I would really like to hear your story and how you started to get interested in nutrition and how you wanted to serve other people through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you know, I'm a physician assistant, and I was working in a hospital system that it really, the focus was inflammatory disease. However, there was no focus on lifestyle. So I was trained as a surgical PA, and we were treating patients who had inflammatory diseases, particularly arthritis of various different kinds. And, arthritis is an inflammatory condition. However, diet was never focused on, movement, what they were doing every day. It was just that they had pain, and they were quickly signed up for surgery in order to treat that pain. And I think looking at lifestyle is so important. So I myself have always been interested in health. That's why I went into medicine and helping other people, and even in my own health. So, reducing inflammation and even prior to being a PA was something I worked on in myself. I was on a ketogenic approach for several years, and then I turned to carnivore. And I wanted to be able to bring that to other people. And unfortunately, in the medical system that we have, that is not the focus. And it's very difficult to cross that line. In fact, they discourage it as a physician assistant. So I kind of got out of the hospital system and am now helping people, coaching them one-on-one. I think my medical background helps, in addition to just having done it myself. I mean, you can only learn so much from a book, but actually having that experience myself, I think, is also beneficial for others.
And for the listener, can you just tell them, like a typical physician's assistant, how much training in nutrition would they expect to receive through school?
Yeah, so we had one course on nutrition, honestly, I think more learning about the lab work was more useful in the sense of what I do right now, because I was trained to interpret labs and be able to correlate those with different diagnoses. So that is definitely helpful for people who are struggling with disease. Um, but nutrition itself, yeah, it's been a lot of self teaching, and I've also worked under low carb and ketogenic physicians who have also trained me in a more clinical setting outside of the hospital. So yeah, it's been years and years of training, but it is, as far as the traditional training, very, very little in PA school.
Yeah, let's jump back to the time that you switched, from learning about the ketogenic diet to the carnivore diet. How did you learn about the carnivore diet, and what did you think of it at first?
So it was really kind of just a matter of overlapping things with like recipes and stuff. The more and more I took out plants, some people would say that, oh, well, this specific vegetable doesn't help me. I dealt with chronic constipation for the longest time, and I was always told, fiber, fiber, fiber. I've had multiple endoscopies, colonoscopies, and everything looks okay, whatever that means. But fiber, fiber, fiber. So it was really frustrating to me that every time I would, include fiber or increase fiber, that my symptoms were getting worse. And so, with that elimination approach, I found kind of carnivore slowly taking away more and more vegetables. And I honestly had never felt better, and I've never been more regular. So, I just dove head in and went to see how much, over time, how my symptoms could continue to improve, and it's been nothing but smooth sailing since.
Wow. So what it is about a, very, very low carbohydrate diet that helps to feed the gut microbiome? Because I think we're told that fiber is necessary not only to help things move down there, which doesn't often happen from what I can tell,
Yeah.
but also that its real value is food for the microbiome. Can you tell us why that may not be true or necessary on a low carbohydrate diet?
Yeah, so I think there are what the major thing that people are missing when they're saying, fiber, 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 is that there are so many anti-nutrients in plants. So yes, it may diversify your microbiome by including those plant sources, but having a less diversified gut or microbiome is not a bad thing. And it's just been, I think, assumed that way because of the push for probiotics, prebiotics, and we're learning that it's like, I think someone once told me, putting fish into a dirty fish tank. Like, you actually have to clean it before you reintroduce them. So in order to do that, by using the carnivore approach as that elimination approach, we're actually healing the source of the problem, the source of the symptoms. And then, later, if you wanted to include a little bit more variety, that's fine. But you can't diversify a microbiome and a gut that's already has a problem. You have to fix that problem first. You have to get to the source.
That was a really well explained answer, and I really love that analogy. I think I'll definitely be stealing that one. So
I don't know who I stole it from. So whoever it was, I give you credit.
It's so funny. I remember when I interviewed Ted Naiman, and I was asking him like what his typical recommendations for protein was, and he said what he thought it was, which was like 1 gram per pound of body weight or ideal body weight. And I sat there like nodding to myself, like, wow, that's a really smart answer. That's totally what I recommend for people, and not realizing that I had stolen that from him years ago. Idiot.
I know there is a lot of overlap for sure.
That's great. Okay, so what other things surprised you with carnivore, not only for yourself, but for the people you were working with and putting them on carnivore diets?
The biggest things that I see improvements are really in energy and mood. So I think that, we talk about the gut, and many people can relate to digestive issues or even the addictive properties of grains and sugars and those types of things. But I don't think there's enough attention that's put on the gut brain connection, and how it can, by healing the gut, you can also heal the brain and, increase your mood, increase your energy, increase, people talk about mental clarity with a low carb keto diet. But even people who are struggling with mental illnesses, I've seen so much progress in these people with the carnivore approach. And I hope that more and more people are made aware of it. We're trying to spread this word, not only for digestive issues, but also for mental health.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That was the thing that surprised me the most was mood. I would always consider myself a pretty optimistic person, but when I went fully carnivore,
Yeah.
that just upregulated. My gratitude went up. I feel like my spirituality went up. My ability to deal
Yeah,
with stress was so vastly different. That really surprised me.
absolutely. No, I completely agree. Just even being in tune with more of your body and what feels good, if you feel off at all in the sense of your mood, that is so much more clear. I've seen in clients who are fully adapted on a carnivore approach.
Yeah, that's awesome. You just wrote a blog post about satiety, which I really love. I love talking about satiety. And I try
Yeah.
to talk about it as being different than fullness. Fullness being like,
Yes.
okay, I ate a meal, I'm pretty full. I really am not that interested in eating. But a fullness that can also provide, a deep hunger in 2 or 3 hours. I would think like, eating a chicken salad or something like that with a light dressing. Like you could get full off of that meal, but you're going to be very, very
Absolutely.
hungry in a few hours. Trust me. The cool thing about a carnivore diet is you're focusing on obviously the proteins and the fats, and you become
Mhm.
satiated, which means like you just don't care for food anymore. Can you tell us
Right.
what are some of the more satiating foods on carnivore and what people should focus on the most?
Yeah, so I completely understand just in the sense, and I hope other people can understand with that blog post that yeah, satiety versus fullness, these are very different things. Many people you can extend, and there's different types of satiety, and just in the sense of like volume versus a mental satiety of yes, I feel satiated. I'm not thinking about food any longer. You can be completely full, but still be thinking about food. So there's a very big difference in those two concepts. Um, I think for carnivore, really the biggest contributor that I see as far as satiation is making sure that you are getting enough fat because protein can actually continue to drive that hunger if it is a very lean cut. Not only for reasons of leaner cuts are less calorically dense, but also just that you're not supporting those hunger hormones that leptin to kind of to signal and shut down that need to continue to eat. As we know, the fat is really the backbone of our hormones. So I think that the biggest contributor is making sure that you're getting a good balance. And, many people, everybody's favorite, of course, is everyone talks about ribeyes, ribeyes, ribeyes. And it is because, it is more of a 1-to-1 ratio of fat to protein, which is much higher as compared to even things like 90-10, like ground beef and things of those nature. So, yeah, I think fat is a lever and it really should be used appropriately. We can't fear fat, as we all know in this carnivore community that we've done so for many years based on what they've been telling us.
Yeah. And you mentioned fat as a lever. Does that make it difficult to make an exact recommendation of how much fat somebody should be getting? I mean, should we just be focusing on that 1-to-1 ratio with protein like you mentioned?
Yeah, I think for many people and clients that I've worked with, actually bringing that fat a little bit higher, is generally what we end up doing. But I think starting with at least 1-to-1, that's a very broad, generalization to start with.
Okay, gotcha. So I wanted to talk about satiety to lead us into fasting because I think
Yes.
this just kind of naturally happens when people are really satiated. They don't really need to eat as many meals during the day and they just kind of naturally start fasting. They're just not that hungry. And if you're not that hungry, you can go out and do other things or work or enjoy nature or something, And so
Yes.
I find that these two things really match up with each other. Somebody doing carnivore and somebody starting fasting. Is that something you've
Yeah.
noticed as well?
Absolutely. Many people will turn to even just 2 meals a day and very naturally get into kind of like a 16-8 intermittent fasting routine because protein and fat are so satiating. So it does happen over time, that there is that adaptation period, which I I say, for the first 3 months, even 6 months, I really like clients to eat intuitively, which that word always sends lightning bolts down my spine because it's just, there's a lot more to intuitive eating than just, eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full. There's a lot of mental struggles that I've seen in clients that contribute to that. And so it really isn't easy, but when you are starting that carnivore approach in the sense of changing from a glucose fueled state to a fat fueled state, there's no doubt that you will last much longer between meals because of that quality of food that you're getting in the fat and the protein.
Okay, gotcha. So what is your definition of fasting? How would you explain it to somebody?
Fasting is not eating or drinking. And so some people, they allow the coffee, the tea, water. There's dry fasting. There's intermittent fasting. There's extended fasts. So, just refraining from eating or drinking in a set period of time. I think intermittent fasting is really the most popular that we see. And that just comes, like I said, pretty naturally with the carnivore diet. Extended fast is where it gets a little sticky, and people are just they're not talking about the downsides or the cons as much as they are the pros. And I really think it's an important discussion because the focus becomes weight loss instead of health, and those are two very different things.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you're willing to have that conversation with us today and talk about the pros and cons. So intermittent fasting to you would just be intermittent throughout one day, like in a 24-hour period?
Yes, I think extended fasting for me is kind of like 24 and above.
Okay, yeah, I totally agree with that. Okay, so let's talk about some of the pros of fasting. What you mentioned weight loss? Why don't we start there? How does fasting facilitate weight loss?
Yeah, so the most common most common reason that that it has been focused on, weight loss has been focused on is in relation to intermittent fasting or fasting in general, is because you are eating less. So it naturally puts you into this caloric deficit. Does that mean that when you finally do eat, that you can't make up for that? You most definitely can make up for that caloric deficit and then continue to maintain. But there is kind of this struggle, and it depends on the amount of time that you are fasting for, or that eating window that you are allowing yourself, how much you feel comfortable in terms of getting in those calories. So it is easier to achieve a caloric deficit with fasting. And therefore the focus has been, a caloric deficit is necessary for weight loss. If you do fasting, you will achieve the weight loss.
Gotcha. Did you notice any metabolic effects with people that are doing fasting? I was fortunate enough to use a metabolic cart for a better part of my career, and measuring resting metabolic rate on people who did fasting, especially in the last few years, has been really interesting to see, how their metabolisms respond to fasting versus doing a, calorie deficient diet on purpose. Is that something you've noticed?
Yeah, so it really depends on the amount or the size of the caloric deficit, is what I've seen in clients. And they've done some studies, like you said, as far as just being in a little bit of a caloric deficit, like on a more consistent basis versus, very large caloric deficits intermittently with fasting, like doing extended fasts. I think that for me, my approach to clients is, going slow and steady and being consistent, because what I have seen, which is part of the thing that many people don't talk about, is this kind of heightened dopamine response to food with extended fasting. Like, yes, you can make it so that your weekly average of calories is less by doing an extended fast for 2 or 3 days. But then your response to that food, or even anticipating that food, becomes that much more heightened. And that is related to neurotransmitters, particularly dopamine. So I've seen people who have done, extended fasting, whether it's every other day or once a week or even a couple times a month, it ends up leading to disordered eating. Because then it's kind of this fixation on this food and when it's going to be their next meal. It's almost like the brain goes into this survival mode. So I prefer, kind of slow and steady and doing that slower over time because it's just, it causes more mental havoc. As far as the physiology and what you're alluding to, as far as metabolic rate, I've also seen with larger deficits, the body goes into kind of that survival mode of, all right, let's slow everything down in order to make sure that everything is still fully functioning. And so I've seen decreased, I haven't, as far as testing individual clients, I have not done so, but as far as where they're depositing, if their weight, if they are gaining weight when they're then increasing calories, it is more visceral fat. So it's kind of this protective mechanism of the body depositing fat over the organs, over our belly, right under our belly button, as a mechanism to protect itself. So I would argue that, the metabolic rate decreases with such large deficits.
Yeah, interesting. This is not a clinical trial or anything. It was just anecdotally what I would notice. If somebody would do a purposeful caloric deficit type of a diet where they were eating frequent meals, but they were eating a lot, less, they were eating, carrots and spinach or whatever during the day, they would absolutely drop their metabolic rate. We could see that they would be burning hundreds of calories less than they would if they were eating a little bit more. And for people that were doing some type of fasting, even if it wasn't like extended fasting, but they were, only having 2 meals a day, I would notice, generally speaking, their metabolisms would be a lot higher. And I was wondering if it was just like maybe an insulin sensitivity response where the body was starting to free up its own fat sources to be used as energy. And we certainly noticed that people could lose a lot of weight and a lot of fat through fasting, as long as they were really smart about it. So anyway, just very interesting.
No, I've very often, I initially I will have clients actually track their eating, and I would say 9 out of 10 times they're under eating, and I will increase their amounts, and it's very scary, particularly for women. They're terrified of gaining weight, which I completely can understand. But just recently had a client. We increased the amounts of food that she was eating. She was, of course, terrified of gaining weight. She lost 4 pounds within the first week, and she's been carnivore for a long time, actually almost 2 years. So it's not that she went from standard American to carnivore and, lost some water weight. So I would completely agree that your body, once it's given the right fuel, it ramps up and utilizes it, learns to utilize it efficiently. And as we know also that protein has this thermogenic response as far as our ability to metabolize it, and we're actually burning more than we would like the carrots and spinach. So I think there's many different factors that contribute to metabolic rate, but we can't fear, properly fueling our body with the right amounts. Yes, fasting can be used as a tool, but it shouldn't just be equated to weight loss.
Yeah, gotcha. That was very well explained. Another benefit or a pro of fasting that you mentioned is autophagy. Can you tell our listeners what autophagy is and why that can be beneficial?
Yeah, so autophagy, it's really the recycling process of the body, and your body goes into a state where you are essentially recycling, proteins and getting rid of the junk, would be the easiest way to explain it, which is very, very beneficial. But do I think that, there are time points where that is maximized and kind of cuts off, and we don't, like I said, you don't need to be doing, autophagy is happening at a level, even if you're doing, even a 12-hour fast. So it's not just this all or nothing. I think that is kind of, and carnivore as a community is full of kind of this all or nothing mentality. So we have to also avoid that in how we look at fasting, because autophagy is that benefit. It's not all or nothing. It's happening at some level. It just, to what degree, depends on the amount of time, but more isn't necessarily better.
That totally guilty of that. I am absolutely totally guilty, all or nothing.
Yes, no, I can relate for sure.
There's definitely some like interesting stories. You mentioned that recycling. I've heard stories of, cancer cells or tumors kind of disappearing, or, I've heard of surgeries not going that well, or things being left inside of people that ends up like going away, like really interesting things that, again, that are all anecdote. The one I think I notice the most is it happens in the skin. When somebody loses a tremendous amount of weight, normally they have a lot of skin left over. And it sure seems like when
Yeah.
people lose weight this way, I notice that their skin is kind of tightening along with them. Is that something you've noticed as well?
Yeah. So another reason, all the more when you are in a very large caloric deficit, you can most definitely lose weight very quickly. But the ability for your skin to kind of bounce back, the elasticity in that skin will vary. So the one of the benefits of kind of slow and steady with fasting, even intermittent fasting, is that autophagy is happening at a cellular level. It's a recycling of cellular components. And so skin is most definitely included in that. And I would agree. I've seen that people who do it slowly over time or incorporate it intermittently, there's less of that sagging, more time for the body to kind of bounce back, and their skin, they may be avoiding a surgery for extra skin.
Interesting. Okay, so before we move on to some of the cons or things to watch out for with fasting, are there any other pros that you want to talk about of why fasting can be a really important tool?
Yeah, so in even in a low carb approach, not necessarily carnivore, really fasting. And if anyone has not yet heard of Dr. Jason Fung, he talks about this. He works with a lot of diabetic clients. He has a complete guide to intermittent fasting, which is a great book. And I think he came out with another one as well. So the major thing is really to improve insulin resistance. That's a major pro of fasting. And again, it's kind of bringing, getting you away from those highs and lows of glucose spikes. So, which is already happening with a low carb ketogenic approach by eliminating grains, eliminating those sugars. But by fasting, you can better stabilize your glucose levels. So again, avoiding those spikes, avoiding those, I'm getting hangry, I need to eat right now. And that again is reversing that insulin resistance over time. So people are becoming more insulin sensitive. So also a major pro of fasting.
Gotcha. If a listener maybe didn't know insulin resistance versus insulin sensitivity, is there a really kind of basic, simple way to explain what happens to cause insulin resistance?
Yeah, it's really so it's kind of like, let me see, the
This is a
easiest
doozy of a
way.
question. I just threw a really tough question
Yeah,
at you.
no, the easiest way to, if you think about it just in the sense of sugar. So you're throwing sugar at your body so often that insulin has to be pumped out in order to bring that sugar down. And over time, like your body kind of says, like, man, oh man, I'm over it. Like I'm not going to be responding as well to the insulin. That mechanism, let's say you have like a total sugar bomb, like you have a piece of cake, your sugar spikes. Your body normally would produce insulin in order to combat that high sugar level and bring that sugar level down. When you do that repeatedly over and over and over, it's kind of like the boy who cried wolf, where it's like, yeah, okay, another one. And then your body is no longer responding to that insulin as it would have the first time. Is that an easy way to explain
Yeah,
it? I'm
that's
not
great.
sure.
No, that
But,
was great.
and so the problem with that is then on a biochemical level, your body is not working as properly. And that's where the inflammation is arising from.
Gotcha.
So this focus on, anti-inflammation is anti-inflammatory approach to diet. That's really kind of the source of it all.
Gotcha. So when we're eliminating those sugars all the time, that then improves the sensitivity. We regain that sensitivity to insulin over
We
time.
regain that sensitivity and we regain that metabolic flexibility, which is another term that many people throw around. You want to be metabolically flexible. You want your body to be able to respond well over time, despite whether it's fat, whether it's sugar, whether it's protein, so that it doesn't get kind of used to those things and then not work as optimally.
Yeah, gotcha. So where somebody was eating, if they were eating like a very heavy carbohydrate based diet, they would be burning all carbohydrates, mostly carbohydrates most of the time, and they would not have the ability to burn their own body fat that they've stored previously.
Right,
Yeah.
right. We kind of want to go in and out of that ketogenic state. It's not you don't have to be in ketosis at all times, but the main goal is really to make sure that your body is metabolically flexible.
Gotcha. Okay, that was very well explained. Okay, so let's talk about some more of the cons with fasting. What is the shadow side to fasting? You listed so many good and wonderful benefits, and it is very, very difficult for somebody, like me, like you were describing, like somebody who's all or none, like, okay, a little bit of fasting is good, maybe a little bit more is great, but taking it too far is not, it's not just better for you,
Right. No, more is definitely not better. This really comes down, the biggest con is the response of our hormones. So, even people, women who are scheduling this fasting, I'm going to do it this day and this day. And I get it. A routine and structure is great, but sometimes no, all the time, you should listen to your body. And so the biggest problem I see with it is the hormone dysregulation, which can come with a slew of symptoms that people aren't even aware of.
I mean, you start out by talking about one hormone, which is, since fasting is a stressful state of being, the cortisol, and that just makes me think, like, what's happening at the level of the thyroid. Can you explain what's going on there?
Yes. So the thyroid will really be the one, as far as hormones, that'll kind of shut down most quickly, as well as sex hormones. If a woman is fasting far too often, I mean, their body will not be prepared to, for example, have a child. So they may lose their period. The increased level of cortisol, I mean, cortisol is increased whether you're going for a run, you're doing sauna, you're doing a cold plunge. Cortisol is not all bad, so to speak. But when you're doing it too often and you have this, it's almost like you get a new level of baseline cortisol that your body becomes accustomed to, and that can really cause some pretty significant symptoms.
Interesting. So I have the list of symptoms here, and a lot of them look like they're also, kind of brain related. So I see anxiety, I see depression, I see brain fog. Can you explain some of the mechanisms behind, too much fasting equals too much cortisol and having those specific symptoms being dysregulated?
Yeah, so I think with increases in cortisol, it really comes down to your autonomic nervous system, which is kind of your fight or flight. And so that autonomic nervous system is heightened as compared to your parasympathetic nervous system, which is kind of your rest and digest. And so it is this heightened response of the autonomic nervous system that puts you in fight or flight and says to the body, what are the most essential things that you need? Like if you were running from a tiger, what would be necessary for you to do so, and what isn't as important, and what can be put to the wayside. And so you will see, increased levels of anxiety, not being able, you're feeling very wired, but you're also, could be underlyingly exhausted. It will increase your need for, it can increase even your appetite. You're constantly thinking about food. So there are physical symptoms and then there are mental symptoms. It really comes down to the mechanism is related to the autonomic nervous system.
Gotcha. It's so amazing what the body can do, how it can really prioritize what's the most important right now and what it can sacrifice to be able to deal with that most important thing and then come back hopefully and address the thing that it sacrificed for the short-term good that could potentially cause long-term harm.
Yes, absolutely. No, it really does. That's what it comes down to, is prioritizing what is necessary now and what can, for example, the sex hormones. And if you are in a stressful state, being able to I work with a lot of clients on fertility issues, and if your body itself does not feel safe, to carry a child, it will not prioritize that.
Gotcha. Yeah, very well explained. Okay, so this one blew my mind and it made a lot of sense. And I'm just going to read it from your blog. Ever notice how the food you break your fast with seems to be the best meal you've ever had? And as soon as I read that, I was like, holy shit, like, yeah, totally. This is something you've already talked about in this interview, but I wonder if we could go in depth in this heightened dopamine response to food.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, many people, even just, there's a couple articles that I read on dopamine and with relation to food, and even just the anticipation of, okay, I'm going to be eating at this time, and you start thinking about it, the dopamine in your body, that level is going up. So it's not just when that food hits your mouth. It's even the anticipation, and dopamine is this pleasure chemical. It's very much associated with addiction, and so there's a lot of talk about feasting and fasting, and for weight loss, I most definitely would not recommend it. But it's this focus on eating a lot, feasting, and then fasting to kind of make up for it, and it really wreaks havoc on this dopamine system that I've witnessed in my clients. It is a reward system, and so it's kind of like gambling, like alcohol, like drugs. Food becomes that addiction, and I've seen a lot of disordered eating habits that have come out of that approach.
Yeah, I was just thinking about disordered eating. I'm sure this would be really complicated with somebody who had a history of eating disorders as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, I think slow and steady and just being more consistent over time is really the better approach, especially in someone who has a history of disordered eating.
Interesting. When I was doing heavy OMAD for quite a while, I noticed that it was almost like physically difficult for me to eat. Like I would kind of feel hungry around noon, but I would push it to 5, and it was like I felt hungry, but it was almost like it was like physically difficult for me to eat, and it was easier for me to just go on a walk and let the hunger pass. And I realized I probably was doing myself a disservice. So could that be related to that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for some, because that addiction, the food becomes an addiction. With that, it is easier for many people. They will say, well, it's easier to just avoid eating altogether, as opposed to having to deal with that increased level of dopamine and then kind of tuning into what your body actually wants. Physical hunger versus that. Just pleasure that you're getting from food. So with the heightened dopamine response and that heightened pleasure from food, it's almost like getting your next hit. So I would definitely argue that can set you up for this. You're questioning in your mind, like, well, I could just honestly go another day without eating. It would be fine. It would be easier to do that than to deal with like the mental struggle of, ooh, this food tastes really good, I'm going to keep eating. And then you get into that cycle of kind of binging, restricting, or feasting and fasting. But it really is binging and then restricting in real terms.
Yeah. You also mentioned the risk of losing muscle mass over time.
Yeah.
And you've already talked about how the body will prioritize what it needs to right now. And building muscle is such an expensive process for the body. Can you talk about why muscle is so important and how fasting can jeopardize that?
Yeah. So when your body is, especially for people who are very lean, when your body is prioritizing energy, it is not an all or nothing, like, oh, it's only going to eat away at the fat that I have stored. Yes, we have generally more fat on us. And so it's a more complicated process to dive into muscle and to break muscle down, but it's totally possible. It's not all or nothing. It can do both. So depending on the length of the fast, you can lose some lean muscle mass. And for anybody that is trying to gain muscle mass or gain weight in general, I most definitely would not recommend extended fasting. I mean, I don't know of any bodybuilders or people in that space that are doing extended fasting. Even close to prep time or close to competition time, because it really can cause loss of lean muscle mass. So I think that the body is, obviously would prioritize losing fat and tapping into fat. We generally have more of that, but it's not going to be an all or nothing. You will also lose some lean muscle mass, even with regular 24-hour fasting. I've seen clients lose lean muscle mass. We've done regular in-body scans, and it's very important. It's not something to be taken lightly. Like, some people will just say, "Oh, well, I just want to lose weight," and no, you want to lose fat and you want to maintain your muscle, and it's not as clear cut when you're just doing extended fast. After extended fast, you will lose some.
Thank you. Thank you for saying you don't want to lose weight. You want to lose fat. That is so critical. So critical.
Yes, there is a difference.
There is a difference. And I miss our InBody. We used to have an InBody at the gym that we used to work at, and we got to validate all of this stuff to begin with. This is the entire reason that I got into low carbohydrate and carnivore to begin with, is we could validate that we would get people to lose nearly 100% of their calories from fat when they started to dial these things in. And it wasn't about losing weight. You don't want to lose muscle. You don't want to lose bone density and connective tissue strength and things like that. You want to burn fat.
Right. And it's so important to know that difference. If you were trying to build muscle or even to maintain, like, you do have to hit a certain amount of calories and then, focus on the macros as well. But you can't build muscle in a deficit. Like, there has to be a surplus. There has to be sufficient amount of energy in order to build those muscles. So yes, looking at the weight on the scale, it may very well go down. But what are you losing? Is it muscle? Is it water? Is it fat? I can guarantee you it's not purely fat.
And I would recommend for the listener, if you don't have access to a good high quality body fat scale, even simple things like taking before and after pictures or doing a simple weight to height or waist to height ratio are very simple kind of poor man's ways of learning whether you are burning more fat. You can certainly see it in before and after pictures.
Absolutely. Even just the amounts of, visceral fat and in definition in your legs and your arms, you will see that over time. As far as fat loss and even muscle loss. So it's important just to, I always encourage pictures, I think once every 4 to 6 weeks is a good start.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree. Okay. So this has been a really awesome conversation, a really honest conversation about
really enjoyed
pros and cons. Let's just like really, really generalize. Again, I don't want to put people in a box, but let's just really generalize the people that come to you that, what kind of person comes to you that you think, okay, intermittent fasting is going to work really, really well for this person? And who are the people that come to you and say they want to try intermittent fasting and you're going, red flag, I don't know?
Yeah. So I think for intermittent fasting, it's really the people who are, and I think it happens very naturally, that are coming from standard American diet or even paleo, and they're really cutting out those sugars. And they're going to more keto or carnivore. And I don't think it's, as far as reversal of that insulin resistance, I don't think it's a bad idea. But I also don't want them to get into that area where electrolytes are imbalanced. They're having kind of those keto flu symptoms. So initially I say just eat as you normally would. If they're doing their 3 meals a day, which most likely being sugar fueled they are. So I'll say, continue to do that. And then they'll more often than not, after a couple weeks, will say, I'm just not that hungry. And so we'll go to 2 meals a day, but I definitely wouldn't recommend just right off the bat going to 1 meal a day or doing extended fasts. It really has to be worked up to. As far as people that I do not think are great candidates for fasting, particularly extended fasting, are people of any type of history of disordered eating or who are just really not in tune with their hunger signals. There is physical hunger and there is, sensory hunger where you're just around food, you smell food and you want to eat. Other people are eating and you want to eat. So if, they say that they struggle with just like knowing when they're hungry or feeling, just in fueling their body, seeing food as fuel, and it is much more emotionally driven, then that is someone I also would not recommend intermittent fasting with initially, until we kind of work through those mental hurdles.
Yeah, gotcha. The other cool thing about fasting is it can always be tweaked. I mean, technically, all of us fast. If you're not eating right now,
Yeah.
you are fasting. And so
Yes.
there's so many different approaches to fasting that just because you try one or just because you can't go, 24 hours doesn't mean you can't get some of the benefit by doing it in a different way.
Absolutely. I mean, I think even with 2 meals a day or 1 meal a day, people get stuck in this. Okay, I'm a TMAD, I'm an OMAD. And it's like, that is what I do every day. And it's, days change. Your schedule can change. Your hunger can change depending on what you've eaten the day before. And your women their hormones are changing with their cycles, where they're those that week before or during they're needing more calories. So you shouldn't put yourself in this box or identify with your intermittent fasting schedule, just as I don't like people to identify with their the diet that I'm a strict carnivore, or it's just unnecessary. It should depend on you, on the individual, and it's okay that there's some flexibility. Just like you want your body to be metabolically flexible, you have to be mentally flexible in your approach, because otherwise, if it's not consistent over time, you can be as strict as you want for a short period of time, but the results that you're looking for, it's more about consistency than it is being strict.
Yeah, I love that. I love that approach. For somebody who seems to be a good candidate for fasting and they want to get started, I've noticed the
Mhm.
same as you. I think naturally people just start eating 1 or 2 meals a day, and that's totally sufficient for them.
Yeah.
Would you tend to normally start with breakfast as the one to get out of first, or is that one that naturally most people stop consuming once they start incorporating a little bit of fasting into their lives?
Yes, breakfast definitely most commonly, especially if with coffee drinkers, they'll kind of just have their coffee and then have lunch at maybe a little bit earlier time, like 11 or 12, versus 2 or 3. I think just shifting, even if you're just shifting your meals a little bit earlier, some people are used to the 6, 7, 8 o'clock dinner. Even by bringing that up just a couple hours, saying I'm going to be done eating by 7, then naturally you may have your the next day you'll have your lunch a little bit earlier. You'll be fine until dinner, and breakfast is the most common that I've seen that's eliminated.
Yeah, wow, that's very practical. I love that. Now, you are somebody that tends to focus on the quality. We mentioned, as we were
Yes.
talking in the very beginning about the quality of food. It seems in the carnivore world, opinions change. And some people say the quality is not as important, or if all you can afford is conventional ground beef, that's better for you than most
Hmm.
things, which I do kind of agree with. But why
Yeah.
is it so important for you to focus on the quality of the food, not just that it's always meat?
Yeah, so I think that what you can afford, obviously that plays a role, but then I also have to look at some people say, oh well, I can't afford that, and then when it comes to electronics or something else, they're spending thousands of dollars on that. So for me, I value food quality, like more than anything. I To me, it's this is the fuel on a biochemical level that is making up my cells, my body, and this body I want to last me. So for me, I would much rather spend it on quality food than on actual things, in the sense of things I use, like electronics. That is me, and so that's kind of my message. If you don't value food in that sense, like I do, and you would rather spend your money on other things, I don't think that you are wrong by getting more conventional, grain finished. It's really up to you and what you value. But from my standpoint, just knowing on a just how processed foods, we look at that and we say, oh well, it's cut with canola oil or soybean oil, and like that is the what has made us sick, in the sense of this processing of things. So the more natural, that I like, the most natural source that I can get as far as food and these animals and how they're raised is important to me. But I agree that, do I think it shouldn't be an all or nothing, end all be all. For other people, they will do just fine. They will continue, to thrive on a carnivore diet by eating conventional. But getting away from processed in any sense of the word, to me also includes, like, if those animals are eating processed grains and processed food, that is potentially then going into my body. So I know it's a nuance that, I don't think it's all or nothing. I have nothing against people who want to continue to eat grain fed. That they don't like the taste of grass fed. But that's just my perspective of what I like and why I think that way.
I love that. I love that you mentioned the cost thing. People would rather have big mortgages and sweet cars and not really care about their food.
If it came down to like a phone or something, I have to replace my iPhone tomorrow. Like, oh, they would do it. And it's, that's $1,000 right there. So it's like, all right, we gotta see what, if it's not something you value, fine. But for me, I do for sure.
I love that. And that's to say nothing of the cost of healthcare later in life when you're, getting really sick and chronic diseases and all that stuff. That's not cheap either.
No, absolutely.
As part of your quality diet, you do include a lot of organ meats. Tell us why organ meats are so important. And then if you could go one step further for somebody who personally doesn't love organ meats that much, how can we make organ meats more accessible and get more of them in our diets, even if we don't appreciate the taste?
Yeah, so I do really enjoy organ meats. And for me, organ meats are kind of the variety of my carnivore approach. There are, of course, different cuts of beef and lamb that I love, but organ meats they're very palatable to me. And I think they bring a lot of different textures to the carnivore approach, which I've just always been someone who needs a little bit of variety in the sense of texture. So whether you grill them or you pan sear them or you bake them, those textures can change depending on the organs. I think they are the most nutrient dense food on the planet. Liver, kidney, heart. I mean, you can't go wrong with any of these things. The amounts, how much we need, of course, is often discussed, and vitamin A toxicity, and that's a whole nother discussion. But I think by including them, you are doing your body good, especially for those who have been under eating for long periods of time, who have been malnourished and are deficient in those vitamins and minerals for extended periods. They can definitely help, especially vegans who have a lot of deficiencies in B vitamins. Very, very helpful for B vitamins. But as far as people who cannot really stand the taste of them, I am always an advocate for real food. So I will be honest, I do not support organ supplements. If anything, I would say, kind of slicing it up. And it's very inexpensive. Organ supplements are totally overpriced. We don't know how much is in each capsule. We don't know what you're absorbing from each of those capsules. They can say grass-fed, grass-finished. They can say all the buzzword, quality words, but essentially we have no way of measuring the actual absorption and whether or not they have, there's really, I don't know, companies that are doing heavy metal testing on their organ supplements. So even things like that, again, you're introducing a processed form of something that you could get through real food. So my vote is for real food, whether you cut it up into even like little 1 ounce pieces, put it in an ice cube tray, put it in one of those Monday through Friday pill things, freeze it and take it like a pill. That is a better option than taking an organ supplement, in my opinion.
Wow. I'm so glad you mentioned that about supplements. I was actually going to ask that. And I agree with you. I think one of the best ways I've ever taken liver is freezing it overnight and then just throwing it down the hatch and chasing it with some water seems to be a really efficient way to do that.
Yeah, no, that would be the easiest way. The other way is a lot of companies are now doing ground beef with organ mixes. So even if it's, 10% organ mix, that's a great option as well. I think US Wellness Meats is one of them that has that. white oak pastures, I believe, as well. So, and even if you don't see it where it's you're able to purchase it for humans, they have a lot of dog food companies that are now doing that, and it's just the fact that they don't have the certifications to sell it as human grade, but it's still the same, ground beef with organs. So definitely worth looking into. Eatwild.com is a great source to look up even local farms where you could buy those organs and then incorporate them as you wish. Getting them locally is going to be a great option.
That's great. So many great options there. It's funny you mentioned dog food. I finally just saw vegan dog food for sale. Like, okay.
Oh God.
Come on.
Oh no.
Dog food. Insane.
Oh no.
I know.
I thought Beyond Meat was enough for in grocery stores.
I guess not. Terrible.
Oh,
tell us
God.
a little bit about your practice and how you work with people today.
Yeah, so I work with clients one-on-one, and it's really an individualized approach, taking a look at their full history, medical history, and really looking at their lifestyle. It's very easy, for people to kind of get into that, which is largely attributed to our medical system of, well, what is my problem and how, do I fix it? What is the quickest way? And oftentimes in medicine, as we've seen, it's with a pill or a surgery. But my approach is looking at the root cause, looking at the source, and that largely includes someone's lifestyle. So things that they may not even be thinking about, whether it's their sleep, their stress levels, how much movement they're getting in each day, as well as obviously the diet is my primary focus. But taking it on a whole picture approach and focusing in on them as an individual, it's so easy to get trapped in this community in well, what's the next best thing, or should I be doing that, and then switching all these different with all these different tactics and not really going anywhere. So I work with clients whether they're just starting out a low carb, keto, or carnivore approach, or they're a veteran and they've been on it for years, just focusing on the details of what they're still struggling with, and in order to make them feel their absolute best and get to the nitty gritty. And a large part also of my practice is providing, as a PA, I'm able to provide lab recommendations and review lab results with clients, which is important. I think that, it provides more data. Many people in this space are tracking, and, data is important. They love data. So lab results are more data to look into, to make sure that over time that those are continuing to improve and supporting the fact that you are improving your health.
Wow. For you personally, what does it mean to work with people in this way versus what you were doing before in the medical community?
Yeah, no, this is the most, so much more gratifying. It is my purpose. It really provides great satisfaction for me to help others. It's always something I've wanted to do. And in the sense of health, and again, even seeing with my own health journey, how powerful the diet is so important to continue to spread this word. So yes, I feel much more whole as a person in helping people in this way.
I didn't really even need to ask the question. You can just hear that passion in your voice. I think that's so cool. And it's so amazing.
Thank you.
So amazing to be able to help people in a way that really fixes their issues. This has been an amazing conversation. I've loved deep diving into some of these topics. If you had one simple tip to leave for the listener, what would that one simple tip be?
My tip would be to focus on you. It's very, very easy to get trapped or fearful of, I'm not going to reach my goal, or having this pressure on yourself of getting it done in a certain amount of time. And I think that focusing on you, being consistent, investing in your own health, those are the things at the end of the day, no one cares more about your health than you do. So really focusing on you.
That's a wonderful tip. Where can people go to find you and connect with you in your work and potentially work with you in the future?
Yeah, so you can go directly on my website, qualitycarnivore.com, and book an appointment. It's a free call where we discuss kind of your goals, what you're looking for in a coach, and make sure that we are a good fit. And then from there, we can go ahead and schedule that initial consultation. And then I have, plans in working together. I work with clients a minimum of 3 months. And so those services, or even if you're just looking for like lab review session. So I have a bunch of different services, which are going to be launched very, very soon on my website, outlining the details of those. But to book an appointment as soon as possible will be at qualitycarnivore.com. I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, engaging with the community. I'm looking to continue to do an IG live or Q&A every week. So you can check me out on those platforms as well.
That's fantastic. We will link to all of that in the show notes. Austin Cavelli, thank you so very much for coming onto our show today.
Thank you. This has been a great conversation. I feel like we covered so many different topics, and I hope it's useful for the community.
Oh, I know it will be. I so appreciate you taking a really honest look at something that, yes, it's good. Yes, there's pros. There can also be cons. Just be aware of that and decide how to use that for yourself. And for you to go out in the world, fix your own health and fix other people, and then help share this message, I think is wonderful. So thank you very much. It was such an honor.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate your time, and thank you again for having me on here. It's been awesome.
Absolutely. It's been an honor. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.